البصمة الرقمية للأطفال المصابين بالحروب بتبقى للأبد. أطفالنا الجرحى صاروا مادة للاستغلال. قديه فعلاً الطفل وأهله عندهم حق السيطرة على الصور والقصص اللي بتنشر عنهم؟ مين بيملك هالصور؟ مين عم يجمع هالبيانات؟ شو بيصير من بعد جمع التبرعات؟ وقديه فينا نوازن بين التوعية وجمع التبرعات وحق الطفل بالخصوصية والكرامة؟ وشو دور الصحافة والإعلام بهيدا الموضوع؟ كل هول المواضيع رح نناقشها بالويبينار يلي عاملينه نهار السبت ب 27 حزيران.
I think we can start. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our long-awaited talk under the platform of Wings for Hope, Talks for Hope. Today, we're inviting you to discuss a very important matter about the media ethics and what's happening in the humanitarian industry. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about it in a small introduction while people are attending as well. And then we will start our interesting panel. So, as you know, we are living in a moment that has no precedent in this modern humanitarian history. Since October 2023, the Israeli genocide in Gaza has generated more child amputees than any conflict in recorded history. And since September 2024, Lebanon has been suffering the same Israeli aggression and violence. These are not statistics. They are children who lost limbs to Israeli airstrikes, toddlers who woke up in hospitals without their parts, teenagers who will spend the rest of their lives navigating a world where it's not built for them. While a big part of the world looked away, another part of it did not look away. Images of these children moved millions of people to donate, to care, to protest, and to change. And that matters because visibility can save lives, but visibility can also cause harm. It can re-traumatize, it can exploit, it can reduce a child's entire existence to a single image of their worst moment, an image they never consented to, that will outlive the news cycle, that will follow them for the rest of their lives. So today we're not here to debate whether suffering should be seen or not. We are here to ask harder questions. Who decides what gets shown? Who benefits from that decision? And who pays the price? This is not a panel about censorship, and of course not about doing less. It's about doing better and being honest about the gap between where we are and where we need to be. Before I move to introducing our amazing panelists, I'm gonna talk a little bit about some housekeeping and tech-related matters sent to me by our amazing organizer, Elsie. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website for a period of time. Also, maybe on YouTube, you will get a notification, all of you. Before each discussion, we will be inviting you to participate in a small poll. It's not obligatory, but we really appreciate your participation. So from your answers, we can tailor a little bit our discussion. And after each segment, there will be a small 5 minutes Q&A session. However, during the segment itself, you can always put your questions, and when it's the time for the Q&A, we will address them. So Elsie will be sending them to me, and I will be, as much as possible, addressing them to the panelists. You can also upvote the questions addressed by other people, and the most voted questions might be the one prioritized, of course, if we have enough time. We see the audience here as our first panelists, so do please share your questions, your experiences, and they are as important as anything else we're going to discuss in our conversation. We invite curiosity, respect, and openness to diverse perspective. And in case you experienced any technical difficulties that we cannot help you with, please try leaving the webinar and log in again. All right. Elsie will be as well putting those in chat. So in case we forgot anything, we have a reference. And now I will tell you a little bit more about the 4 extraordinary voices that are with us today. People who have navigated these tensions from inside the newsroom, inside aid organization, inside therapy rooms, and the communities themselves as well. Allow me to introduce them in an alphabetical order. So we have with us Anayel Saadeh, Safety and Mental Health Specialist. We have Malak Harib, Senior Video Producer for Lebanon and Syria at the Associated Press. We have Ruba Ghadban, Gaza Rehab Care Program Director at Ta'awun. And our guest speaker, Ala Harfouch, the co-founder and the director of Asociación Humanitaria, Wings for Hope, and of course, the enabler of this platform. So thank you, Ala, for inviting us to discuss this today. Ala, as the co-founder of Wings for Hope, you have sat on the other side of this conversation, watching the people you work with navigate the consequences of media exposure firsthand. So please, I'm going to give you the microphone. Take your time to tell us about your experience.
Thank you, Shiman. Hello, everyone. So at first, I would love to give thanks to everyone behind today's event, to the amazing panelists, to the amazing organizing team. I will try not to take much of your time because I'm personally also excited to start today's discussion. So Talks for Hope is one of our projects under our awareness and education program, through which we seek to raise awareness about the issues and the challenges that we encounter in the work that we do. So to raise awareness about the people we serve, explore ways of how we can serve them more effectively through a continuous effort to create more and more impactful interventions, rather than accepting the harsh status quo. We are a group of Arab independent professionals. It's a Palestinian-led association with experience in humanitarian work, project management, organization development, also media. But first and foremost, we are members of the community of the survivors we serve, who were actually directly affected by the Israeli terrorists. Given that we are not a media organization, I would like to also start with the reasons behind why we chose to organize such event discussing humanitarian media ethics. For us, it was clearly apparent after hearing firsthand stories of media abuse from most of the survivors that we serve. There was no authority or regulator to turn to, so we chose to invite professionals to speak about this issue and put aside our emotional reaction to the matter. So the Guardian stories that we hear, it's about how their children were exposed to such malpractices, media malpractices, which are clearly driven by the humanitarian organization's need for visibility, which in turn translates into more donations. Our patients are war and genocide survivors. We put them at the center of our efforts. The humanitarian media malpractices became a common problem, and we realized that a discussion needs to take place. NGO social media pages are now being treated as a portfolio and a gallery of their work, with disregard to the negative effects on the survivors' dignity and privacy. The majority chooses public domain promotion instead of responsible donor relations. The importance and quality of the photo or the video has become greater than the actual aid being provided. An ecosystem that is competing to raise funds from the general public through social media and marketing campaigns. A strategy that relies primarily on quick-click donations through emotional portrayal of the problem while parading success stories. However, when we specifically speak about the prosthetic aid ecosystem, success stories are different. It's not only about watching a child taking their first steps after their tragedy. Prosthetic aid is not a one-time intervention. It's a continuum of care and follow-up. One video of an amputee child walking does not portray what happens next. How does he feel in 1 month? Is he still using the prosthetic? Did the prosthetic actually provide him with some independence? I was one of the people who watched social media posts of other organizations about success stories for certain children, and I was really proud of what I saw. But when the time came and I met some of the same children who I saw on social media, I was shocked, to be honest. Organizations, from that sense, we feel like organizations are competing to attract amputee survivors with promises that cannot be fulfilled. fueled by securing the patient to be able to post about them, seeking visibility, trend, and funding. We met with countless guardians speaking of their children being filmed right after being provided with a prosthetic and then abandoned in the following moment, realizing along the way that the prosthetic that they were provided with does not really help their child. Only then we came in touch with the reality behind those social media success campaigns, and that prosthetic aid success stories that is being portrayed in social media rarely exist. A common saying that goes now between the guardians of Gaza amputee children is that the NGO gave us the prosthetic, took the picture or the video, and never saw them again. Stories of media coercion, exploitation, and blackmail, driven by power imbalance and a colonized donor culture that seeks emotional triggers while diminishing the dignity and the consent of the survivors. And by now, we have also become used to pictures of amputee and vulnerable children being paraded around with T-shirts holding logos of organizations. As harmless as it might seem, I would understand branding food parcels and different kinds of aid, but when did we start branding children as well? There are many stories and many issues, but due to our limited time, I would like to recite to you about a couple of them. I will say the initials of the child and their story. So, OK, a 6-year-old boy who suffered a below elbow amputation, also severely injured with burns, fractures, shrapnels, and plus he lost his family. Alongside his uncle and aunt now, who are now his guardians, he was flown to the US for treatment. After being treated and undergone surgeries, he was also provided with an upper limb prosthetic. But prior to their exit from the US, the family was asked for pictures with the child wearing the prosthetic. This was asked while his arm was still in recovery, swollen, sensitive, and wounded. They forced him to wear the prosthetic while in pain, took the picture, gave the family the prosthetic in a plastic bag, and instructed them to train him themselves on how to use it. WG, a 14-year-old boy. He suffered 2 amputations, one above knee and one below knee. His father was martyred alongside his other siblings. He was still in his test socket, which was not yet in the right fit. He was paraded around in events and social media posts while clearly refusing to participate. Still in pain, still not comfortable in his prosthetic, he was forced to stand and walk around for hours at a fundraiser event. After a big incident that included abuse, they were sent back to Egypt while still in his prosthetic and not provided further care in Egypt. YF, a 13-year-old girl who suffered an above-knee amputation and an eye injury, also forced to be paraded around media for media purposes and public showcasing, with the family always in fear that if they reject, then they won't receive the treatment and the aid. Where is the agency? Where is the consent? Lastly, I would like to say that we are forever proud and inspired by the people we serve. We hope that this discussion helps and develops into action for the sake of our children. We hope that better practices and better standards are followed. Thank you, and I will leave it back to Shiman. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for this heavy intro. I would say there's a lot to discuss today, starting with what you told us. And thank you, Elsie, for keeping the time. Before we start the first segment about power, consent, and exploitation, I would like to invite you to participate in a small poll. Elsie will be publishing it right now. We have 1 minute just to, pick an answer. It's only one simple question. Should I be able to see it, Elsie, because I don't right now. There. Thanks. So who do you think humanitarian media, when posting about injured children, is primarily designed to convince? Is it the donors, the general public, the policymakers, or the survivors' communities? Let us know what you think. You've got 1 minute. Okay. Let's see the answers. So is this also everybody can see the answers, right, Elsie? Awesome. Okay, so 50% of you said the donors. It's designed for the donors, 45% the general public, and 5% the policymakers. 0% answered the survivors community. You know, alarming. Okay, so let's start with our discussion. The first segment we have, as I mentioned, it's about power, consent, and exploitation. And what Ala just shared with us brings us to a broader question, one that sits at the heart of how humanitarian media operates, who controls the story, and at what cost. I will start with Malak, but before I ask you the question, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about her. So Malak Harb is the senior video producer for Lebanon and Syria at the Associated Press, based in Beirut. With more than 2 decades of experience, she has reported from across the Middle East on conflict, politics, and humanitarian crisis, including the wars in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Ukraine, and the fall of Assad government in Syria and Gaza Strip. So welcome with us, Malak. I have the first question for you. And from your experience, how are war victims, especially children, addressed in the press and in the humanitarian media campaigns?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So, as you've just mentioned, I've worked in the news for nearly 2 decades, and I've covered lots of conflicts and wars across the Middle East. So, what I've noticed during this time is that images of children often have the greatest impact because suffering transcends politics, cultures, and borders. But there's a fine line between documenting the human cost of war and stripping people of their dignity. So many families want their stories told. Speaking to the media can give them a sense of agency and hope that their voice will be heard, especially when they feel forgotten. So I've seen this, for example, with Syrian families searching for loved ones in mass graves right after the fall of the Assad regime. These families and these women, they chose to share their grief because they wanted justice and accountability. But on the other hand, I've also witnessed the opposite. So there are cameras sometimes that crowd hospitals like paparazzi. They film victims immediately after strikes when people are at their most vulnerable. So while those images document the reality of war and can be very powerful and sometimes even win awards, they can also compromise someone's dignity, particularly when families have not yet been informed or victims are unable to consent. So these are difficult decisions that journalists often have to make in seconds. And our responsibility is not only to show the reality of conflict, but also to do so in a way that respects the people whose stories we're telling.
Mm. And if or when the consent is requested, what does it look like on the ground?
So, informed consent goes beyond someone simply agreeing to be interviewed or filmed. So, it means that you have to ensure they understand how their words and images may be used and the potential consequences of speaking publicly. So, this is especially important in authoritarian states or in conflict zones where expressing an opinion can put some people at risk. There have been times when people willingly agreed to speak to us on camera, for example, but we chose to conceal their identity or alter their voice because we believe that publishing whatever they said could endanger them. So protecting the people we report on is one of our core responsibilities as journalists. And this becomes a little bit more complex when interviewing children and minors. For example, many teenagers want to speak about politics, conflict, social issues, and their perspectives are important. But as minors, they may not fully understand the long-term risks of speaking publicly, particularly in volatile environments. So journalists have to carefully balance the value of amplifying their voices with the duty to safeguard their well-being. The Associated Press and many other news organizations have very strict editorial guidelines on consent, privacy, and the protection of vulnerable people. And those standards apply consistently across all coverage, from peaceful communities to active war zones. And they're designed to ensure that reporting is both ethical and responsible.
Mm-hmm. And Malak, what narratives are repeatedly demanded by the international media in these cases?
So, international media has increasingly focused on the humanitarian impact of war, highlighting the suffering of civilians. Now, the challenge is to do so without reducing people to victims or stripping them of their dignity and agency. So, even in the worst circumstances, people find ways to cope. For example, you'll see a lot of stories of mothers who are unable to feed their children, but you don't see enough stories that include what they actually do to try to feed their children. And where I work, I've noticed there's a growing emphasis on telling these stories of resilience alongside the hardship. So I'll just give you a small example. Recently, in this war that is happening in Lebanon right now, we did a story about Hajj Subhiya. She is in a tented displacement camp. And basically, she decided to start making manaish for the entire area where she lives and just feeding people, not taking any money from them, but just feeding the entire community. And it's a way of bringing normalcy back into people's lives. And so her generosity doesn't diminish the reality of war. It doesn't change the fact that she's displaced, all these people are displaced, but it shows how people maintain their humanity despite it. So I think journalism is moving towards portraying people in crises, not just as victims, but as individuals with resilience, dignity, and the ability to shape their own stories. In my opinion, there's still room for improvement, but there is a greater awareness today than there was a decade ago.
Glad to hear that at least. Thank you, Malak. I'm gonna move to Ruba and ask you a few questions, but before that, I want to as well tell our audience about you a little bit. So, Ruba Ghadban is a program director at Ta'awun Welfare Association, a Palestinian civil society organization dedicated to strengthening the Palestinian communities. Central to her current work is the Gaza Rehab Care Initiative, launched in January 2026. So, congratulations. And translating evidence of systematic collapse and a long-term coalition response. Ruba, my first question to you is, in your view, how important a role does media play in project success?
Hi, Shiman, and thank you very much for having me. Amazing panel and very important topic. I'm happy that it's on the agenda and we're talking about it. The question of how important media is, let's look at it this way. I'm managing a project, an initiative. So for this specific initiative, which is about rebuilding rehab services, rehabilitation services for war survivors that are amputated in Gaza. So that's the specific focus of this project. Because this is a very attractive area for interventions by NGOs, and crowded area, I think media becomes important in this topic. There are many interventions from different NGOs focusing on providing prosthetics or rehabilitation services, different parts of what the patient actually needs in their care way. So they do a lot of exposure on media, on their social media. And in some cases, the interventions are national, coming from other countries. So they get regional media attention. So for our specific case, Gaza Rehab Care, we do need to have some media attention to find our place in the ecosystem of interventions, mainly to show what our focus is, which is the long-term 20-year commitment we have for rehabilitation services, the full ecosystem of care, and to invite other interventions to cooperate and collaborate so we have a common vision, a common roadmap on how we provide these services, and common standards, among them this kind of standard. How do we talk about visibility of our beneficiaries, our war survivors? How do we do that? This dialogue is needed. So yes, media is important in certain projects, not all projects in Ta'awun, but in projects where it's crowded attention.
Yes. Sure. And okay, I have a different question for you as well here. How do power dynamics affect children and families receiving medical aid when requesting media consent?
I mean, of course, the consent, anybody that is in dependency there is an imbalance in the power dynamics. You can say that. In our case, we don't provide the medical service directly. We are an NGO that provide funding to the local service providers that are Palestinian service providers, in this case in Gaza. So they are the ones providing the medical care to the patients. We don't go find the patients and give them that service. So the consent would come through the service provider. The service provider is selecting the patient, establishing the relationship with the patients, asking them if they want, and then our team would come and pick a day, and it's all the service provider that is picking actually the day and putting a lot of requirements on if it suits them or not, if the patient is on board, the caregivers are on board, and we establish our own relationship with them after a while. And usually we're wanting to learn the story so we meet them quite a few times. It's not just go take a photo and go. So yes.
Okay. Have you encountered the need for more visibility to secure funding?
I do notice that there is an increasing need, request for visibility. Now, in our case, we have members and donors, so it's different. So you have members to the organization, and of course, they want to see and ask for Ta'awun is doing a lot of good work. Why is this not visible? If they hear about this, why is this? So that kind of visibility, show more what you are doing, because they're very proud of it. From a donor perspective, yes, they want documentation, but that's different. That's another thing, the donor reporting. Some of them want to fundraise for our causes, and so they ask for cases, for stories, so that they can help fundraise for us. And this usually happens around Ramadan. It's that type of events that creates that need for visibility. And then there's that dialogue. Of course, most of these institutional donors, they have their own requirements, their own standards for what's okay to visualize and not. And we have that kind of dialogue. So there is a need, especially when you're fundraising for Ramadan, I would say. You see that need, like, we need cases of orphans, we need cases of, our project just launched, we haven't really finished the communication strategy just yet. So this is coming right on time for this kind of dialogue.
And you mentioned as well the reporting for the funders. To protect the children's dignity while still reporting impact.
Yes, I mean, donors, we have to remember, Ta'awun has existed since 1983. This hype of visibility over social media and websites is relatively new in the age of Ta'awun, you would say. So the documentation for donor reporting is the same. It protects the child. It's not really about the child. It's really about the impact. Is it 50 children? Is it how many have received the services that was sponsored, whether it's orphan care or study loans or that kind of thing, and written stories, names, that kind of thing. There's no exposure of the children this way, and just goes directly to the donor to know about where did their money go, and usually that's all they're interested in. The new hype, I would say, is this about social media, that we want to count followers, and now members or other donors are asking, how is your following? Show more visibility about the project. There is some kind of hype, and maybe this is not relevant, but even me as a parent and in school, you notice that there is a hype about visibility in general. And unfortunately, it's become a market of pain. And we need to fight this. So this is timely discussed. We need to start educating our donors, our members. Where do we draw the line? And can we talk about the narrative of what is going on? Because we have to remember, we're also a Palestinian NGO. So we see this as telling the narrative as well. It's not just any typical humanitarian aid. We want to tell it from the Palestinian perspective, the Gaza rehab care, how we are rebuilding rehab services, the Palestinian voice. So we have to show the way, I would say. We have to lead the way and have these uncomfortable discussions about where do we draw the borderline to what is not acceptable, what is and what is okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruba. I think now we can start the first Q&A session. And I have one question. I'm gonna read it out loud. So, why does news need to convince us? How is it different from informing us? Anything you touch is transformed. I used to think make things beautiful if you are researching them in some way. This is becoming difficult in this context. So the question is, why does news need to convince us? Maybe Malak, I don't know if you can answer this question.
Could
And
I just get more clarification on like convince us of what exactly? Sorry if I'm missing something.
anything, okay, so I'm gonna just read it. How is it different, like convincing us from informing us? Like they are trying to convince us instead of informing us, and exactly convincing us about what? I think this is also the question. And there's another one as well, Malak. Maybe you can answer them both. What if the media services are making the word uglier?
The media services, what, like how they're making it uglier?
What if the media services or the media, what media is offering us or what they are catering are making the word uglier with the news?
But this is the thing. It's our responsibility to make sure that we're not making the world any certain way. We're just showing what is in the world. There is a lot of ugliness in the world, but there is also a lot of resilience and a lot of beauty. Like I do remember I've worked the majority of my career in this region, and one thing that I've constantly talked about is that this region is not just all war and destruction. Therefore, it's very important for journalists when they're covering this region to not just show stories of war, to also show stories of resilience, stories of hope, to show both sides. You know what I mean? So you're not just showing the death and the destruction and the misery because that's what sells. Because unfortunately, sometimes some media will do stories about what sells. But that's not what you should do ethically as a journalist. You should be just showing exactly what is on the ground, whether it's good or bad, and showing it from all different perspectives. That's one of our responsibilities.
Okay, I also have one more question. By the way, Elsie, I'm able to see the Q&A on my screen. Thanks for support because we had a small technical problem a couple of minutes ago. So Fuad is asking us, where is the line between necessary visibility and psychological exploitation? Fuad, we will start the next segment, and it's going to be all about the psychological effect on the children specifically. So I'm gonna put your question a little bit on the side for now. And there's also another question for people fundraising with individual families directly. Do you have recommendations for protecting privacy and safety? I think also this question, it will be, answered along the way in our conversation, especially now in the second segment. But before I jump to it, Elsie, if you can post the second poll so we can take as well your answers on a very small question. So have you ever considered the long-term digital consequences for a child shown in humanitarian media? Yes, no, I'm not sure. So you can take a little bit of time to think. You have a few seconds left. Elsie, do you have the answers ready for us? Okay, so 50% answered yes, you do consider the long term. That's great. 22% no, and 28% I'm not sure. So if that's so, let's start talking about the psychological harm, children and cyber risk. Mainly we will be talking in this segment with Anayel, but let me introduce her a little bit. So Anayel Saade is a safety, security, and mental health specialist with over 12 years of experience in humanitarian and high-risk environments. She specializes in psychological safety, protection, and crisis response. She supports journalists, human rights defenders, and frontline workers with a focus on human rights, dignity, and ethical engagement with vulnerable communities. Thank you, Anna, for joining us today. I think we have a lot of important stuff to hear from you. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions. I put them together for you, and I'll give you the mic after that. So, what are the immediate psychological effects on children who are publicly exposed with injuries or disabilities, and the long-term risks, identity formation, stigma, and retraumatization? Sorry.
Thank you, Shiman. Okay, to start, let's start by forgetting a little bit about the fundraising part, the donations and everything, and let's try to put ourselves just in the feelings or in the psyche of a little child that just got injured most probably by war in very violent contexts. And when we think about the injury, I want us also to think a little bit about the pain that the injury would inflict, the situation, the psychological situation of the child, their emotions, the feelings that they're going through, the loss that they are coping with, and the body being the center of how the child behaves and shows themselves and their identity. That was also hit. So how they are coping with life, with either lost limbs or disfiguration sometimes, or burns, and So I would invite us just to put ourselves in their places, just to think from a little bit of an empathetic place. And so the moment the child is being photographed, let's think about the moment zero, starting from there. I don't think that's a neutral act for the child, because it can be a little bit intrusive. What we are enhancing, or what we are really trying to show, is a certain injury that they have in a moment where most probably they can be feeling exposed or in pain or feel disoriented. The moment captures a certain pain. We're talking about reconstructive surgery for children suffering from war wounds. So already the theme is very heavy. In many cases, the child does not understand a lot what's happening. Imagine when we were 6 or 7 years old and in pain or injured. They don't know why they are being photographed. Even if we explain, informed consent exists, making the child feel comfortable exists. And consent from a child does not count. We all know that. We usually seek consent from the parents. So how much did the child agree on anyway? Starting from there. And also, so consent is given usually by the parents or by the caregivers of the child. And when we're talking about fundings and raising money and being able to have or go into procedure and have a certain surgery, we cannot disregard the power dynamic that is there. So if I'm a mother and my child needs surgery, I know I will do everything. I know I will not upset the person in charge, the one that is able to make that decision. So I want us also to think a little bit about the power dynamic that exists there and that cannot be ignored. So what is consent in that way when there is that power dynamic? Is it really optional? Will I deprive my child from having a certain surgery that will let them lead a more normal life, let's say? Okay. So it's a little bit shaped by a certain fear, I think, at that point, from losing access to help. Then, as adults and professionals, our responsibility is not limited to only getting the consent, but also to protecting the child. Now I will give, after talking about this whole consent thing that's extremely important, I want to just take a minute to dive deeper a little bit in the psyche of the little child. So the moment where I'm taking the picture, the moment where I'm exposing a child, the child, what can they be thinking? Why they're being seen like this, why they are being exposed like this. Sometimes they are proud, and sometimes, a lot of times, the child would love to take a picture, but do they calculate also what comes after? Sometimes children, as in the examples of Ala, children can be suffering from If we get a little burn from, I don't know, like anything in the house, we can talk about it for hours. Imagine war wounds and how much pain comes after that, and the pain management and everything they go through. So, when I'm capturing this specific moment, it can also reinforce a certain identity, a vulnerable identity that the child has, the injured child, the vulnerable child, the one that is in need. And we're talking about a child, his self is still forming, they are still growing up, the way they look at the world is still really getting shaped at that moment. So this moment can be, it can be handled well, as it can be traumatic, as it can be distressing for a child. The presence of a camera or a team can add an extra layer of stress also. And so then at that moment, we can say that the vulnerability of the child is not only there, is not only enhanced, but it's also documented. So from a human, very human, I don't know, motherly, just non-professional point of view, it's heavy emotionally. Okay. And this can become even more complex when we are talking about children living with visible injuries, such as amputations and burns. Also, for a child who went through that experience and the things that they are dealing with, what are we inflicting on them? And also, how are we helping them through this to rebuild a sense of safety, reintegration, feeling normal again? Is this what this is what I would invite us to think about. Is this being helpful for the child? Okay. And what are the effects and the ethical boundaries in that? The body image that is already altered. Me, I'm posting it like that. So it's very central to how the child sees themselves. Do we want to be doing that? And are we doing that for the right reasons? And so, yeah. Also, there's a question of how others will look at this child, because the picture rarely goes to one person. Usually we see it, whether it's social media, whether it's in reports that are shared to show how good the work is or how much donors should donate, etc. The child is not only experiencing their own reality and their own pain, they are looking, they can see themselves through the eyes of others, and others will look at us as injured people. This is the identity that we're putting in the front, and it's the identity of a child that is in pain. Also, it can increase the stress, it can increase their sense of discomfort, of pain, of shame, etc. So,
My as well.
what? Of what?
My like the victim sense.
Of course, of course. And it will increase the sense of exposure. And this is what scares me the most. Like, we're using the child as a tool, while our main objective should be really helping the child recover physically, psychologically, rebuilding themselves, rebuilding the way they see the world. They have seen war, they have seen pain, they have seen managing pain, and reconstructive surgery is something grand. I had the chance to work in that, and really, it's grand for us even as adults. So seeing a child go through that pain with artificial limbs, and so it's a lot on them psychologically. And what I would invite us to think is that if at that moment, me capturing that moment will bring more help than suffering to that child. And the impact is not only instant, because I'm taking a picture and I'm posting, I'm documenting the moment of pain. Okay. So the impact does not necessarily stop in that moment. What is often captured in a moment of pain or vulnerability sometimes becomes more traumatic for the child. That is already, most of the time, we're talking about war injuries. So they have faced trauma, they have seen pain. Me, focusing on that more will risk a re-traumatization to the child. By re-traumatization, I would mean reliving these same feelings. Do I want to do that? What emotions am I evoking in that child? And am I really helping there? So what kind of support do I want to do I choose to give? So I think focusing on containing that moment of pain, not putting the child into more distress or repeated exposures is key in that. Also, I wanted to say also that over time, because this child will grow up and the images of this child are shared and they are out there. And we've seen examples about, let's forget reconstructive surgery and war-related wounds, but like of Afghan women shared 50 years later, the impact of them. We have seen things like that. So imagine if you're a child, you grow up and you grow up with pictures of you online with a certain moment of pain, like fige in time, stopped there. So what is the effect on identity also? They need to somehow outgrow what they went through. And me, somehow, I'm highlighting a little bit that moment. So their story is, in a way, told before they are old enough to choose how to tell it. It is out there. And this is where I would push us to think about consent again, okay? So I think it's very important to hold that even if the intention behind taking these images stays positive and about raising awareness and mobilizing support and everything, putting the child in the middle, measuring the risks that are on the child, the risk of exposure, the risk of repeated vulnerability, re-traumatization, and all of that should be prioritized more than raising funds or support. It's up to us, not up to us. It's our ethical obligation to protect the child before using the child in order to get more money, even if we're doing that in order to save them. I think I've talked enough.
Enough about this topic, and also like I could sense the like you kept repeating how heavy it is for the children, and I think we all could feel the heaviness while you're talking,
I did
honestly.
not mean to inflict re-traumatization, secondary trauma upon anyone.
Thank you for sharing all this. I have a more question, one more question for you. How does the cyber identity theft intersect with the humanitarian imagery? لأنه we spoke a lot now about, you know, putting these things on digital and staying forever.
Okay, so once I'm putting these images in the digital space, the question is not anymore about the well-being of the child only. We're talking about this form of exposure. Also, this question of control, security, and the long-term risks that are there. The images that we post online, they do not only exist in that moment. It's impossible to delete something online. I'm setting something in history. So once an image is taken, once it's shared, it does not belong to the context anymore. It's an image that shall survive through all of this. And this image can be copied, can be stored, can be circulated. It becomes data. So this data, what is our job here? It's to protect it carefully. Whenever we are treating medical records, since this is also like we're talking about the medical aspect of things, how deep and how much effort do we put into protecting medical data? So when it comes to the picture of the child, when it comes to their face, to their identity, why don't we treat that as sensitive data as well? Now we see some images get blurred, but we've seen a lot of pain on the child, on the face of an innocent child in order to afflict certain emotions. So also thinking about what data am I putting out there and the dangers that that can cause. And we know like in normal, like where there is no suffering, if an image of a child is being used online, we know how dangerous that can be. So a vulnerable child from a war country that is war wounded, how heavy can that be to see their pictures online being used like as people want? Even if some sort of consent is obtained at that moment, it does not protect the child for the things that can come afterwards. And that's what I want to focus on the most. The child and the family are rarely aware of how the image will be used later and who will circulate it. In that moment, we get consent, but later no one puts the image in a box and stops using it. So once it is online, our control is lost. And in cybersecurity, we use a certain analogy where we talk about images being put out there or any sort of data like toothpaste, like dentifrice. Once you get it out, you can never put the information back in. And for me, that is a key place to start thinking from. So I'm putting the image of this child outside with all the data that's there, their age, where they live, the type of wound, their vulnerabilities. I put them at more risk. When we talk about cybersecurity risk, most of the time we talk about هندسة اجتماعية, so social engineering. So whenever I want to target someone, I gather data on the person. And here we are sharing like their history and their childhood and their pains and their vulnerabilities. So also thinking about
Well, their location sometimes, you know, like
of course. And When we post instantly about a certain vulnerable child in a certain location, just like for ethical journalism and stuff, we are putting much more danger on the child, because usually if a child lost their parents or is in pain or whatever, strangers and creeps, God, this is the basic thing in protection that we work on. Like, do not, and never the location and the faces and where they are in pain. It's very personal information. It's medical records, it's data. And like, we feel free. So from a psychological perspective, this changes the whole nature of the experience for the child. The moment is not contained, it can reappear, it can resurface, it will follow the child over time. And the impact is not only like the impact is inflicting a long-term impact. So when they grow up, this image that they see about themselves online, an image that they gave consent to when they were 5 or 6, but an image that they did not necessarily choose or consent to, or that no longer represents who you are. When we work after reconstructive surgery on healing, on your identity, on everything, most of the people, they don't want to see the vulnerability. They really need to turn the page. And us just putting it out there is can pose more psychological risks, let's say. So it will continue to exist, the image will continue to exist. And there is the risk of the image being taken out of context. And we all see how, especially images of children, they can be used for other adaya and things. And different narratives and different platforms. And so our sense of responsibility on this.
See, when the genocide started as well, when you were speaking, I remembered as well that there has been some pictures used, okay, from Gaza, okay, to talk about another war happening somewhere else.
Voila, exactly this. And they're still using it in the same context of war. Sometimes it's taken out of context, like when we see violence and cybersecurity, and especially because children, they're not protected. People, like, empathy is very relative to where you are and how you see life. So in that way, we're exposing them to more danger, while our first objective was to actually protect and give them a better life. But in order to act ethically, we need to be measuring every little risk that we're inflicting upon the child. And going back to the first idea and everything, whether we are first responders or working in surgery or raising funds, our main objective is to protect and to do no harm or no more harm on the person that was already harmed. Okay? So by doing this, we need to keep that as our main objective, because in order to get funds, if I'm causing more harm, then I'm doing it wrong. And this is where I would invite us to think a million times, like, how to do it better. We can always do better on that level, especially when it comes to children, war wounded, coping with reconstructive surgery. So yes, what I want to remind us is that we're not only taking the picture, we create a version of the child that will outlive their presence, their reality right now. And that will travel through time and through platforms without their consent, and it will take shapes. And longer after, they will still see it. And somehow this image, I will say that they never consented to, because they were too young. What is consent when you're 8 or 10 or even 12? So voila.
Thank you, Anna. I'm going to give
Thank
you a little break and address a couple of questions to Malak and Ruba. Okay, just interfere whoever have an answer, please. So, have any one of you seen cases where exposure directly harmed a child or family later on in your work?
No, not me personally. I've heard, but not me. No, not in my work.
So I've certainly seen situations where there was a real risk that exposure could have harmed someone, which is why sometimes we decide not to reveal someone's identity, right? Even when they agree to speak. So in like a grieving parent, for example, a teenager that's speaking openly or someone that's criticizing an armed group, they may not realize that those images can circulate long after we're gone and we're not interviewing them anymore. So I've also seen cases where images of victims were published before relatives had even been informed of their death, or where people were filmed in hospitals immediately after a strike in their most vulnerable stage. So those are moments that stay with you as a journalist because they force you to ask whether the public interest outweighs the individual's right to dignity and privacy.
Okay, I'm gonna take some questions from the audience about what we were discussing. Let me just read the. Okay, so we have Elliot with us asking, what real power do the families of affected children hold against NGOs? How can they navigate through the request of NGOs without losing aid? Whom of you can answer this question? I'm going to keep it, Elliot. I will keep this question and maybe we will. Ruba, do you have an answer?
I mean, I have a reflection, and I think it's a very important question that we keep asking ourselves. With some NGOs, maybe few NGOs, yes, the family could say we don't want, but there is a power imbalance, and I think this is a question we need to raise louder among us NGOs in the NGO sector, in the humanitarian aid sector. It depends on which NGO. There is a dialogue. They can say no, it won't affect them. They can have an opinion about how photo is taken, no faces, all this kind of because let's say we're not talking about no visibility here. We're talking about the how to do the visibility. There's ways of doing silhouettes, giving the story, getting to know. But if the family is in a very vulnerable situation and the few NGOs that are around it want the same thing, no, I'm sorry. It is a sad story. That's why we're having this dialogue, and we need to keep asking that exact same question.
Okay, I have another question as well. Maybe Anayel could answer. Anayel, do you think storytelling and words without images protect the child more, even if it costs some time, maybe a lack of funding somehow?
The question was, you're asking me? Okay. In my opinion, there are many ways of doing it. Sometimes, because also like the stories where we do not put the face of the child, but that represent the reality of things in order. And for me, the reality of things, it's good to educate people on what's happening. I'm going to talk in the next segment on this. It's not about triggering their emotions. It's about somehow providing better help for the people that are in need. So if we use, I don't know, storytelling or movies or cartoons or whatever way it is, the less exposure we are giving, the less identity exposure and the less pain, like the less we try and instrumentalize pain, the better it is. Yes, of course.
Malak, I have a question for you as well. How much control does the families have over the narrative? One of the people are asking our audience.
So I mean, they should have full control of the narrative, really, because they're the ones that are telling their stories, and our job is to tell their story and not to change it around to kind of fit our own narrative. At least that's what ethical journalism can be. In terms of minors, they have full control because the rules are you cannot talk to minors without families' consent and without families being present. In terms of vulnerable people in times of war, I think it's really important, as we had mentioned earlier, sometimes people speak and say things, and then afterwards we realize that we shouldn't put that out there, or we shouldn't reveal their identity because that would put them at risk. So in terms of the narrative, they should have full control of the narrative while we ethically make sure that their dignity is respected.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'm sorry, guys. I know there is a lot of questions, but unfortunately, we can't take them all. We are very time limited. We still have an entire segment, very interesting one, and I think maybe it's the most that we can relate to if we're not humanitarian in the sense of like we don't work in the industry or we're not media experts or mental health experts. We are at least donors. And in our next segment, we're going to talk about the donor culture versus the donor responsibility. But before that, I'm going to ask Elsie to put the third poll for us so we can, have an idea how we think towards this matter. So who do you think bears responsibility if a child's image is later misused? The NGO, the media outlet, the donor culture, or all of the above? Okay, so the majority, 38%, answered with the NGO bears the responsibility, 13% the media outlet, 0% donor culture, and 50% all of the above. Okay, let's then jump to our last segment and one of the most interesting as well. So everything we've heard so far from our panelist and our guest speaker, Ala, the power imbalance, the psychological harm, the digital permanence doesn't happen by accident. It happens because there is a demand for it. So let's follow the money. And based on that, I'm gonna ask the first question to Ruba. Ruba, what does a healthy donor relationship look like without public exposure?
I think it looks like what we have been doing. Again, we've been in this since 1983 at Ta'awan. And before this hype, a healthy donor relationship, which still exists, is the trust between the donor, the transparent reporting, the milestones, the financial accountability. You have donors that understand the impact, the anonymized impact, without this personal relationship to the beneficiaries. The healthy relationship looks like when we separate what we communicate publicly from what we communicate to donors, and educate the donors, that we work with the donors in making them aware of this, that we have been communicating responsibly and have had a healthy relationship and still have it. And now we have to take into account a new risk at the beneficiaries that you are supporting as a donor, and let's have this discussion. So I think this is a healthy donor relationship, that we take what we are discussing today together with our donors and tell them we have new insights that we'd like to share, and let's talk about this and how do we raise the standard together, because that's what they've been doing with us since 83.
Yeah, that's a good start here, I guess. I want to ask Anayel as well about the emotions. Okay, what emotions are humanitarian campaigns trying to trigger for the donors? You're on mute.
Sorry, it's the age. So when we're exposing pictures of children in pain, what kind of emotion are we trying to inflict? I think we're hitting somewhere that would activate an immediate response in our brain, because we're showing literally pictures of children in pain. So we're triggering a very fast instinctive response that is linked to empathy, threat perception, and urgency. And usually this is used, it's instrumentalized in that way in order to trigger that fast reaction of empathy in order to get funds. So in a way, it triggers us to act before we really process what we just saw. And these images can be powerful. They go straight to our reaction. That is very basic. But in this way, we can say that the image of this child is being instrumentalized and used somehow in order to influence a certain response. So we're weaponizing the emotion behind it in order to drive a certain response. And I think we need to pause a little bit, because when this emotion becomes our main drive, we risk shifting away from understanding the reality in which we are, towards simply reacting to a certain imbalance and inequality that's there in life. Okay? So instead of engaging in the complex issue that is war, that is inequality, that is very limited access to healthcare, to reconstructive surgery in children's cases, and instead of thinking about this problem in the system that we need to fix in a proactive and long-term way, we're triggered with an emotional response where we give a bit of money and we feel better. So this very shocking picture creates a very immediate response, but is that sustainable? Is that how useful is that on the long term? And this is what I would invite us to think about, because these campaigns, they rely on these emotional triggers, on very strong emotional triggers that would trigger our most basic emotions, like empathy, like guilt, like pity, this sense of saving others. Okay. And while these emotions can mobilize attention and action, they also come with risks. When guilt and pity become our primary drivers in this situation, the person in this image is reduced to a symbol of suffering. And shall I remind you, the person in this image is a 6-year-old child with a missing hand. So rather than this child being seen as a person with their full dignity, with their complexity, with what they went through and how they're achieving, we're hitting on the pity, on that emotional response. So it creates a certain dynamic and reinforces it, where one side is positioned as the person that needs to save the situation, and the other one is put in the victim's position. In some cases, it can feed also our savior dynamic, where the focus, instead of being on the person, it shifts away towards an emotional experience, towards the viewer feeling better about the image that they saw, the emotion that it triggered, and their action that came and gave them that certain response that can be validating. So there's also another effect that I'd like to discuss, and that's the effect of repeated exposure of images that contain suffering and pain over time. So we're exposed on that, on social media, on whatever we're on, platforms, on the internet especially. And it leads us to a certain emotional saturation. People feel overwhelmed, and with time, sadly, it creates a contrary reaction. People become desensitized to pain. So now we're completely capable of having our coffee, switching between a child getting bombed and then a recipe. We have that brain elasticity nowadays, and usually it's grand. It's big on our nervous system, on how we're behaving, and this pushes us to desensitize, so to care less with time. We're gonna disengage, because people also, they cannot be heavily traumatized at 7 in the morning while having their coffee also. So it does create a bad reaction on the long term. And yes, in some cases, it also can trigger what we call compassion fatigue or secondary re-traumatization, because it's true that I'm not living that experience, but somehow I am seeing the pain of someone else. So also, a lot of people are directly affected by that emotionally, and they can carry. We have seen images of pain that are so violent in the past few years that they stay with us. We think about them, and that's what we call secondary trauma. It's trauma that I'm carrying that is not mine. And does that push me to help? Is that good, constructive empathy that works on working the system and filling the gaps in the healthcare system and providing equal opportunities for children? And so voila. So I am not very much in favor of this, because the goal stays to trigger a reaction instead of fixing the problem. And so yeah, these structural gaps are enhanced more whenever we show pictures like that and we expose in that way. And it does not, because this is the exposure, it does not necessarily protect the dignity of the person, of the child. And so, yes, we need to act in a more responsible way on that level.
What you have shared now, it's not only as well, يعني, we saw another layer, not only the safety of the children, but also the safety of the viewers, the audience,
The
us.
empathy of the viewer. It creates a counter effect. I get desensitized. If you show me a painful image once, it will hit me. If you show it to me 10 times, we're like that. We're humans. We have great self defense mechanism, and that's how we survive wars and we act normal. So it desensitizes people.
In addition
Sorry.
to, you have mentioned about the guilt, empathy, and saviorism, because it depends on the target audience to whom I'm catering this kind of media.
How am I showing pain, and am I also the thing that I love is like how we quantify pain. You know, like who is suffering more? Who to empathize with more. And the more I think about empathy and where we are geographically, and like you empathize with the countries that usually are next to yours. So, like what to trigger, it's very much studied like in the background of things and it's very short term. In fact, that's the sad part. If it was like something consistent, you're creating an emotion and then this is a consistent, sustainable system, then okay, it's worth it, I'll tell you, but it's not.
Ruba, you wanted to
Yeah, I very interesting, and it just made me think, and I feel the discussion we need to have with donors, and we have it regularly, is what is it you want to see? What's the purpose of the visibility? Is it to feel something or to see the change? That should kind of steer the discussion. And I also just want to kind of make a tiny distinction between institutional donors that are very focused on visibility. When they talk about visibility, it's more the reporting kind of visibility. They want to see the effect and the impact of the donation so that they continue, and so on and so on. So that's a different discussion. And then when you come to the mass donors, the crowdfunding needs, one of the questions was about, well, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good fundraising for families. How do I think, as someone fundraising, as an individual fundraising for a specific family in Gaza? And we have that when it comes to crowdfunding. This is where it gets a little bit hard. And when where you think that they are looking for the pain, and you think they are looking for the face, show me the face, let me listen to them talking. So we need to, I think a lot of the discussion, we need to start looking for these innovative ways of showing visibility. We need to also provide good examples of this. And I know, Ala, you at Wings for Hope, you've been working very hard on this. I think it's very inspiring. There are some of our donors that fundraise for our causes that they put silhouettes. So it's about tools, really. The tools are there. They don't put the child's face, they tell the story. They put shadows, things like this. I also want to say a big hello, a shout out for Visualizing Palestine, an organization since 2012 telling the narrative of Palestine. And they helped us in our first report. I don't know if you can see it. With using their images of amputation, child amputations, and it's not faces and so on. And the same thing with the orphan report. We made a report about orphan care, and it was the drawings of the orphan children and their stories. So it wasn't personal, but you got the feeling. So what we were trying to trigger is a personal connection to the children, and they managed with infographics, with source. So the tools are there. I want to say the tools are there, and I fully agree. It's like we just need to be innovative about these tools, talk about values, share these values with our donors, just the way you are doing at Wings for Hope. You know, you're taking that uncomfortable discussion with each donor of yours, putting yourself in that position. So more of us needs to do that. But while we do that, we also need to show examples and be innovative like this, and cooperating and showing them we can tell the narrative, we can trigger that feeling that you need to be able to support. We can do that in different ways while protecting the children.
Amazing. Thanks, Ruba. A couple of things. First, it's nice what you shared about this book and the art they are doing. Eventually, we had a question that I couldn't answer, or I couldn't say it out loud because of the time. They were asking about if we're using art somehow instead of like a picture itself. So it got answered. And as well, you mentioning Ala and what Wings for Hope are doing is also like this was the next now conversation with Ala. I wanted from him to share with us a few things because I'm also very excited to learn. One thing about this entire donor culture versus the responsibility is also our responsibility to educate them because we somehow it's a cycle, right? By being them being lazy, okay, and us making them more lazy by giving them whatever they want all the time, all the proof, all the pictures, all the everything, all the cases as they are. But let's hear from Ala now. If you can tell me, how do you educate donors, Ala, to due diligence?
So,
You-
yeah, I would also like to comment on something else as well, because we were always used to humanitarian agencies are mostly multinational, foreign. They are used to portraying us in certain ways when it comes to victims of war or any humanitarian crises. And we think that this way of portraying and this kind of marketing campaigns have been contagious to even local efforts, like which we see things differently. For me, I'm a member of the community. The beneficiary or the survivor is I'm from that community as well. So we think in a way that this is my mother, this is my brother, this is my cousin. So what I don't accept on myself, I won't accept for them. So I think we have to at some point go back to the colonized culture behind humanitarian media campaigns, and also as donors ourselves, we're getting media or marketing campaigns that are designed to affect people in the United States or in Europe or in Australia or somewhere that are not, they don't understand our culture. Like, for example, for young females, we have a strong culture against showing females in general on social media or on media. Uh, I'm talking about, we're talking about cultures in Gaza in specific. So we're also speaking of something that when you describe that to a foreigner or someone, he doesn't really grasp yet what does it mean for a young female to show herself on social media in this way, in this manner. So I think one of the first steps on NGO level, on a donor level, I think we need to decolonize the way we think about images, and because we are being triggered as not being part of this community. So I think the rise of NGOs, or let's say grassroots movements, is something very beneficial to the sector in general, because at the end of the day, when you're a member of community, you really care about the aid reaching the person instead of anything else. We saw the extreme of the media power from the beginning. We saw what's been doing, the exploitations, the extreme showing of also false advertising in many cases about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And we really cared a lot about being very specific on what we do and the way we communicate that. We communicate that not through a public domain. We have strong donor-to-donor relations where we can tell the real narrative of the survivor. So through our newsletters, for example, we protect the privacy of the beneficiary, of the survivor. We speak more about the story. So that's part of, to be honest, the decolonization efforts. At the end of the day, we're a local NGO. We need to support each other in this way, to protect each other. And the educational part is really important to the caregiver and the guardian. In most cases, the child has lost his parents, and the guardian I'm speaking to is an uncle or an aunt, and they are trying to they're trying to basically support their niece or their nephew in their journey. So we tell them basically upfront, if you say no to media, we will still give you the aid. And what we get usually is, all right, I don't want to. So yeah, that's my time. Thank you.
I don't know if it's your time or the time of the entire segment. I need to ask Ashley, what that was exactly. It's,
Yeah, it
sorry.
was the entire segment.
Oh, okay, thank you. طيب. But I still have one tiny question for Ala. معلش. Ala, make it fast if you can. So how do we protect both the victims and the money of our donors as well?
Yeah, I think it's a very tough question, to be honest. And it's because I can't say we are the example to be followed because we are a small organization. At the end of the day, we're a group of volunteers, we're a group of community members that we are arranging efforts. But when you talk about huge organizations with huge payroll and a huge infrastructure that they need to keep going to sustain themselves and provide help, that's a big question for them. But I think protecting privacy and basically everything Anayel was talking about, education, protecting their privacy, protecting their cyber footprint, everything digital footprint. So, and also what Malak was talking about regarding protecting their narrative as well, and not get lost in what kind of outlet their narrative is being produced from. So I think the first thing and foremost is to think of them as that they're children, they're war survivors, they're traumatized. They still have the strength to go on and continue their treatment, and it's inspiring to see all the survivors with, I mean, sticking together and moving forward. But I think we should be a support and another arm to protect them from everything else going on.
Right. Okay. Before I jump to the final Q&A session, Elsie, if you can put the fourth and the final poll for us to see the people what would answer after, as a reflection after all our discussion today, as it's coming to an end. So would you donate without seeing images if transparent reporting was provided? And guys, don't worry, just be honest. If you're still feeling that, yes, you still need a picture, say it, because that's a long journey, for all of us. Let us know. Okay. So 80% said yes, and maybe 20%. Okay, that's a good start. Why not? It's going to be now our last round of questions. I've already have some here. Let me just pick one.
Also, Shishi, I updated the document if you want per segment and per questions that they weren't answered.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's a nice question for Anayel, I guess. So what are examples of language we can use with donors to reject the normalization of saviorism and suffering?
I think a lot of education on that level can help. And instead of posting shocking content and focusing on that, maybe focusing on education on that level and changing the narrative in a way where we don't need to expose those things in that way to shock, where we don't need to instrumentalize, where we try to have an open dialogue about building a healthier place to be able to, because we need money for it to help children. But like what would be, and maybe engaging the people in that, because I think with like we just did this panel right now, and I don't think that anyone disagrees with, like when you look at it from a certain point of view and you see the human being in the center of this approach, no one would disagree, or rare are the people that would disagree. So maybe changing a little bit the dialogue and the language and raising awareness on that level, so people wouldn't have to go to the length of shocking other ones in order to get basic help for children, I think.
Yes. There's also another interesting question. I don't know, maybe Ruba can answer. How competitive is the donor NGO ecosystem? And of course, how does it reflect on
I mean, you mean of course, there's limited financial resources, and we see that in the reports that come. Funding to Gaza is less and less with time. So, of course, there is competitiveness. I wouldn't say in the visibility, but there's competitiveness. The competitiveness among institutional donors is for trust. Institutional donors want to sponsor an organization that they trust and they can see. It's not really about how visible we are. It's a bit different than the grassroots movement. So yes, there's less resources, of course, more competitiveness, but then it's about trust, showing that we can that we have provided impact. In what way have we provided impact? None of the institutional donors we work with, for example, Gaza Rehab Care, we don't have a single case before receiving funding. We have received funding, but without before the launch, and that is built on trust and that we have a history of delivering impact, and that we are actually a Palestinian NGO working with the local, in enhancing and strengthening the local capacities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, I won't be able to take more questions as the time is running fast. And we still have one final question to all panelists, including Ala, if we can all reflect on it. What would be the building blocks to reduce the malpractices we have touched on today? I know we spoke about education, maybe change a little bit the language, but let's put them all together as a final conclusion for our audience today.
I can start.
Yes.
I think building a culture that's more trauma-informed, especially when we're helping war-wounded children. And also, I'll go back to the idea of raising more awareness on the harm that is being done whenever this is instrumentalized, and creating a healthy culture of help, and not a culture where we need to have a victim and then a savior. We really don't need that. We're talking about gaps in a system that is not protecting children, about the medical, which should be a basic right for everyone, just like education. We don't need to go to those lengths. We need to activate and people in a healthier way.
Talking about creating healthy culture of help, I would say maybe one keyword that Ala would support as well, the solidarity mentality, right?
Yes, of course. Where you don't feel, but you feel superior when you're helping someone, and like we don't. This imbalance itself is pretty imbalanced, you know.
Okay. Malak, would you like to tell us as well from your media perspective what would be your building blocks suggested?
Yeah, definitely. So from a journalism perspective, I think there are 4 key building blocks. Better training, strong editorial guidelines, a culture of verification and informed consent, and a shift in how we tell stories. So we should report not only on people's suffering, but also on their resilience and agency, as I had mentioned before. And so at the end of the day, ethical journalism is about remembering that people that we cover are human beings first and news subjects or stories second.
Right. Ruba?
Yes, I can say from our perspective, Ta'awun or our size of NGO, Palestinian NGO, definitely review what I would call the field level consent protocols to make sure that it explicitly acknowledges this power imbalance and make it clear. Donor education is the number one. Donor dialogue and education, really, because some of our donors actually do educate us too. We have a wide range of institutional donors, and some have touched upon this and others not. They expect from us to have this donor dialogue. But I would also add a third building block, which is considering the size of town and our role in the ecosystem of NGO. As a Palestinian NGO, we could raise this topic more among the bigger NGOs too. The way we do with orphan care and with other topics, the rebuilding of rehabilitation service, this could be a topic that we can raise too. it is raised sometimes, but more like watch in our programs, how do we protect children and so on, but never on the visibility. So this could be definitely a topic. And the last building block I have to say is, now I'm seeing it from a Palestinian NGO perspective. We do have interesting Palestinian-led models like Visualizing Palestine, Wings for Hope. You're doing work on the grassroots level. Let's bring this up and set a standard for how we want and start amplifying it with others as well. So I believe in good examples, spreading good examples.
Same here. Ala, do you wanna comment?
Yes, I would second Ruba as well with the terms of donor education for sure. I think like Ruba was mentioning before, there's the institutional donors and there's the crowdfunding or individual philanthropists as well that not part of a big organization, and they have a lot of grants and a lot of also funding that they do. Because I really think due diligence is an important factor. Not when I see an NGO on social media that I like, or I see their pretty pictures and pretty videos, I need to talk to them. I need to ask them about their projects. I need to ask where my money is going. I need to ask what kind of services. I mean, there should be accountability when receiving donations and giving donations, because at the end of the day, it's a responsibility towards the beneficiary. At the end of the day, we need to all hold each other accountable. At the end of the day, it's the children that are being affected, like we've been seeing on the ground. I just mentioned a couple of or two or three stories of what we have seen, but there's an ugly world out there, and we took this step to do this because if it's a one incident or two incidents, that would be okay. I mean, it's not okay, of course, but something that maybe it's an individual mistake or something, but we're seeing it on a very broader level. It's becoming very common, and yeah, I hope we can start this conversation and have an actual building block towards a better.
I think it's definitely
Let's say.
something. It's not just this talk. This is just let's call it the first step. And I'm very as well hopeful and excited to what we're gonna bring together to the table when it comes to this topic. Unfortunately, we don't have time anymore. Like we're 2 minutes more than we promised our audience. I want to thank you all for the participation. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you, Ala, for giving us the opportunity to do this talk. For all the audience that made it today with us and interacted. Sorry for not being able to answer all your questions. And I will leave you with one last little thought that ethical media does not mean silence. It means the people at the center of the story get to decide how it's told. That is not luxury. This is the minimum we can do. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again in another activity, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you, Shiman.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
You.